very much. Sorry, that was mine.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you for inviting me into your living room this afternoon. I know it's kind of hard when you're giving a presentation in the middle of the afternoon, so if you need to stretch and get up and move around, that's fine. When I looked at the questions that Andrea had, it really falls well into what we do. And I was trying to think, well, how would this fit well into what you all do? And of course, one thing is education is always good, learning something about the investors and the stakeholders that you have that support your organization. But the other thing is I've actually had situations where a nonprofit group will call us up and say, you know, we're going through a situation, we're thinking of buying a business that has some value for us because it's going to generate some income. What do you think? And of course, that's right down my alley, so I have a lot to think about when it comes to that kind of a situation. So there is some direct analogies that would fit in with what you're doing, but then there's a lot of just kind of general information that might help you in terms of understanding the people that are supporting your organization. So I'm not going to read everything that I've written down because you can do that in your own spare time, but I put together 16 different elements that I think are important indicators of successful businesses. The last 12 through 16 are really more related to if you're trying to sell a business. The first 1 through 11 are if you're either buying or selling. And one axiom that has to do with what we do, business brokerage, being an intermediary, mergers and acquisitions, is that a good business is a good business to buy. If it's a good business to buy and hold, it's also a good business to sell. If the business has got some issues with holding on to it or developing it, it's probably not going to be a good business to sell. So a business that is ready to be sold is probably a good business to keep as well. Does that make sense? So something to think about. Good businesses are good businesses, period, whether you buy them or sell them. But some of these, I think, are more important than others. The most important thing, and I know that's important in your business, your organizations, your nonprofits, and that's cash flow. I mean, that's something everybody everybody in every organization is faced with. How do you develop and build cash flow? So the most important thing that we do when we look at a company is we ask for their financial statements, and then what we do is we call it recasting. We take their financial statements and we convert as much of the personal benefits to the owner back to cash. And then we make adjustments for rent, we make adjustments for managers, if we have to add people, accounting, whatever we might have to add back into the company to make it look like it's supposed to look like, if it's not that way. And so cash flow is the key factor in understanding and valuing a business, and that was number one. But a part of that is, and what we have to look at is the financial statements themselves. So are they good financial statements? Can we trust them? Practically everything that I wrote down here has a story behind it. Some deal we were working on, either something that worked or didn't work. But yesterday, I looked at some financial statements, and we looked at the balance sheet, and it didn't add up. There was no way. There were a lot of assets that weren't on the balance sheet, so we checked the tax return. They didn't put the balance sheet on their tax return either, so we asked the gentleman and his wife about that, and he says, well, we're so busy trying to set the company up and operating it that we thought we'd eventually get to that. And I said, well, if you want to sell it, you're going to have to eventually get to it right now. So a lot of times we're playing catch up. We're actually looking at what their business is doing and trying to project that out here and say, okay, what's a buyer going to think? And that's why I'm saying the quality of your financial statements. I asked Andrea, I said, to be in United Way, to be one of the nonprofit organizations, do you have to have audited statements? And it's kind of a yes and no. It's yes if you're big enough, no if you're smaller, which is a very expensive proposition if you're a big organization and you have to get audited statements. But but the quality of the statements are really important. So, another thing that I think is important, or a couple of things, matter of fact, the group brought it up here, is how often can you leave as an owner of a business without the wheels coming off? In your organization, how long can you be out of the office before you start worrying? What type of things keep you up at night in your business? These are things that we want to know about if we're trying to bring a business to sale, or even if we're trying to grow the business. And so one of the things we recommend is that the owner take some time off. What we want to do is see how long he can be out of the business before he starts experiencing problems if he hasn't done that. Some people tell me they can't take a long lunch. Well, that's not a good thing. Other people, I mean, these are true stories. We're working with a company right now, we're getting ready to close, be closing probably the next 60 days. And every morning he's either on the golf course or he's working out. He doesn't come in till noon, he works about 4 hours a day. You're ready for that one, right? You want that? Okay. But anyway, we've got some that are on a sailboat for 6 months out of the year. They come in about April, they leave about November. And so we've got various people that their businesses run so well they don't have to be there. We've got others that, like I say, can't take a long lunch. So what we recommend is that as a owner of a business or in your own situation, that you have somebody from a succession planning situation that can start taking over some of your responsibilities. And if one person can't do it, it might take 3 or 4 people and divide the workload up. But you also might find that there's something you do that's unique nobody else can do. That's not actually a good thing. You need to have somebody that can do everything, not necessarily one person, but at least a group of people that can do everything that you do. Because there is going to be the issue, I mean, all businesses, all organizations, everything eventually has a succession of some kind. And that can be either positive or that can be negative. It can add value or it can subtract value. But that's one important thing. The other thing is the advisors that you have, the people that you work with, your accountants, your CPAs, your attorneys, your financial advisors, your business advisors. All these people are really important. And we'll talk about that on the next page as well, a little bit more. But that can really help your business if you've got the right people advising you. I went through this kind of quick, but are there any questions on the first page? Because I'd like to spend more time on the second page. And these are indicators of a successful business, one that's likely to succeed or fail. And if you look at the first 2, the financial, your business background, whether you have a degree in accounting or finance, that is sometimes important, but oftentimes it's not important. Again, I had another individual whose business is out of town. He flies every week, has his own private plane. In fact, we flew down there and looked at it. It's a manufacturing plant. And he came in my office yesterday, and he knows his business real well, but he couldn't tell you a thing about his financials, not one thing. But I can tell you one thing, he makes a lot of money. He's got a very successful company. But the only way you can find out about what the company is really doing financially, you got to ask his CPA. And so we have a lot of conversations with the accounting and his CPA. So not having a good business background doesn't mean a person's going to succeed or fail. But if you don't have that background, you've got to have somebody that backs you up. So you need a good CPA or a good financial advisor, somebody that can help you in that department. The other thing is working hard or putting in long hours. I know a lot of us do that. But again, some people can work a half a day and get a lot done. Other people, it takes a lot longer. There are some jobs that if you go into that job, you're buying a job. If you have like one Subway restaurant, you're working a job. I mean, no matter how hard you work, you can only do so much. Now, if you own 10 subways, that's a different story. You start building value and you can start changing your lifestyle. But if you have a certain type of job, it's really, to some degree, going to define how far you can go. The third one is turning over key functions of the business to others. That can lead to failure. I can't tell you how many people have come into my office that were ready to sell their business, or at least they had the experience of somebody embezzling from the company. And there must be an awful lot of bookkeepers that either come into Pensacola or from this area that have this tendency. So one thing I can tell you is you need checks and balances if you've got a bookkeeper, especially if it's somebody new you're not familiar with. You want to get references on those people, because we've got a huge problem in this area, I think, with people from accounting or bookkeeping that feel like that their percentage should be a little bit larger. So this is one thing that we've seen, and it really leads to a lot of failures of businesses. So it's one of my concerns. The other is, and this happens all the time. I got a call today on part B, and that's salesmen, sales manager, representatives. It could be technical people, service people, contractors that don't have non-competes, non-competition agreements with their companies that they work for. This again is a big problem, because if they leave, then a lot of that technical knowledge, a lot of those appointments, a lot of those contacts that they have, they take with them. One gentleman recently had all of his contacts on his phone, and we gave the phone back to his, the owner of the business. He erased everything. So the owner of the business has no idea who he was calling on and where to pick up the business. He says, I'm out of here, I'm quitting today, and he just handed the phone over to him, and that's where all his account information was. Kind of an unusual story, and I'm sure there's a better way to do that. But again, it points to the importance of having agreements with key people that can either build the business or hurt your business. And then partnerships, investors, without clearly defined agreements. Again, whenever you have partners or investors, you need buy-sell agreements, you need shareholders agreements. You've got to have agreements that clearly define relationships and responsibilities. And then these are fairly well-known issues. Undercapitalization is one of the top 2 reasons business fail, because there's just not enough capital. When we do an analysis of a business, one of the things we put together is typically a financing format. Oftentimes, if it's between $1 to $5 million, we'll look at a SBA financing format. And with that, we have to put in CapEx, or the capital expenditures. We've got to put in the amount that's necessary as far as working capital to keep the business operating, to make sure that however we price it is a reasonable price based on all these factors. Because a lot of, again, buyers, if they're not sophisticated and they haven't done this before, they'll forget that they need a lot of cash to keep the business going. So we want to know how long the cycle is for sales to collection. If we don't, then we're going to probably put about 90 days of cash back in the company. We need to know how fast the equipment depreciates to determine how often we have to buy equipment in that business. So these are some of the issues. The other is another reason for failures. Somebody who does not have direct industry experience or something related, or some way to connect the dots to get from his background experience back to where he's at right now as far as buying the business. So this is, I don't know if Larry talked about this as far as business plans, but if somebody is looking to buy a company, one of the things the SBA looks at is if they have direct industry experience before they can purchase the company. And then got this experience right now, or this situation, and that's personality unsuitable to own a business. I've got one guy bought a business recently, and he doesn't like to deal with the public, so he just locks himself in his office. He won't come out. And that's if he shows up. Last couple of days, he hasn't even shown up to go to work. So there are some people that this isn't a really good idea to buy a business. So you have to be a little bit risk tolerant. If you're too risk adverse, it's going to be a problem. And then too trusting of others. Again, there's a situation or experience or a story, a tale with each one of these. We had a business recently, and the owner was in a completely different business, and he decided to go into this other business industry, knew nothing about, so he hired a consultant, and his consultant convinced him to spend millions of dollars on this company and business. And he bought it, had no idea what he was doing, and now the business is owned by the bank and is going bankrupt. But a lot of it had to do with, he hired a consultant and he believed everything the consultant told him. So that's an issue I've seen. And then some people can't make a decision. Eventually, in all of your situations, you're put in that place where you've got to decide whether you're going to go this direction or this direction, and you've got to make a decision. So some people just don't like to do that. Then it's probably not a good idea to own a company, because eventually you're going to have to do something like that. Any questions on this section?
No, but I would say, Bill, buying and selling a company may sound a little, out of our realm, but everything that you just said is covered in some degree today. When you talk about 90 days cash putting back in the company, that's what they recommend for us as nonprofits, is that you have a 90-day reserve. So if you don't have the money coming in, you got something to hold you up on. Same type of thing, the trusted consultants. A lot of times our boards trust the consultants more than they trust us. So you have to be involved and upfront on that action, and that's what's going to cause the program to fail, your business as a nonprofit to fail. All of it comes back into play for every one of us every day. So it's just, you got to apply. Remember, we got to apply that business mentality to our nonprofit businesses. Got to get better at that. Much better.
Okay. The third page was the business plan, how to stay on track. And I think what you've got to find is, well, what method works for you? Everybody has a little bit different way of doing this. I wrote down $500 on here. You don't have that on your sheet. If you want to write $500, go ahead. But what happened was I got a check one day for $500. I go, what in the world did I get this check for? So I said, thank you very much. So I called this gentleman and sent me the check. And I said, hey, it's around Christmas. I love $500. Thank you very much, but what's it for? He says, well, about 3 years ago, you convinced me I had to write a business plan. And you said, now I shouldn't repeat this, but I'll tell you this. I told him, because it's true. I said, even if you don't look at it another time, the chances of you doing better in your business, just because you wrote the plan up, is like 80%. I saw that in some kind of a statistic, so I just repeated it. But anyway, so he said, you got me off my duff. I decided I need to write a business plan, so I wrote one, and by golly, I made my goal. And I got another check next year for $500. So I thought I was going to get another check the following year for $500. Instead, he called me and said, I'm ready to sell my company. And so we sold his business. And that was the second business we sold for him. But, we sold 3, I guess, now. But anyway, I think the thing that was kind of interesting was that he took that to heart, and he decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sit down and write that business plan. Now, actually, your odds go up that you're going to achieve it if you actually look at it again periodically. I mean, that's not a bad idea, but what you got to do is figure out what plan works for you. And for us, we have a weekly, what we call a work week. And my wife, who's been part of my organization for 35 years, and our assistant, the three of us sit down and we figure out, well, what's important? What do we got to do this week? Where are we at on every deal we're working on? And we go through it's about a 3-page list, and it has every deal that we're currently working on, and typically work on between 40 and 50 transactions at one time. We're in various stages with 40 or 50 deals. And so we go through every one of them, and we reiterate where we are on each deal, because we can be anywhere from top to bottom, about 20 different places, from just meeting a prospect all the way to closing. There's 20 different things that happen in that system. And what we want to know is where we're at. As a matter of fact, one of the things we're going to do, but we never did it, we're going to build like a big bulletin board like this, and for every one of these, we're going to have a horse, like a horse race, with a track, and we're going to have them go down the track, because there's 20 different spots. But we didn't know what we'd tell the customer or our client if he came in. We looked at it, he looked at the board and says, well, what's that horse way in the back? And I said, well, that bag's not getting going. I mean, that guy, we just can't keep that guy going. He said, well, that's me. I said, well, then no. Anyway, so we didn't know how to do that, so we decided that wasn't a really good idea. But it does have some merit, because you've got to figure out what do you do that actually gives you kind of a concept or a scope of where your business is at any one time. For us, it's that weekly work week that we do. And then that ties into our monthly budget, and then that ties into our annual business plan. But it's the weekly plan that's the tactical part of it. The rest of it is more strategic, but that's like where the rubber meets the road. That's the thing we got to do right now, today. So that's kind of my presentation. If you got any questions that you'd like to ask me about businesses, or how that relates to what you do, or if you have any questions about any of this. Sure.
I have a question about social enterprise. While as nonprofits, we don't necessarily buy and sell businesses.
Right.
Social enterprise has become one of the fastest growing funding streams for nonprofits. Are you familiar with that, or have any comments about that?
Social enterprise?
Yeah, social enterprise can be anything from jewelry manufacturing, which is what they did before Katrina, or after
Right.
Katrina in Louisiana, where an artist created a particular bracelet and they sold them across the nation, really, and had to take them to mass manufacturing from hand development, because they became so popular, and the money went back to Katrina relief, to it could be selling bottled water, it could be it could be a thrift operation.
Okay.
Which all of them are forms of business. They're just a for-profit under the banner of a not-for-profit umbrella.
Okay. A little bit familiar with it, only from the standpoint that my wife and I have been into that. We've got some ideas in a nonprofit way that we're investigating. Would ARC fall into that?
Yeah, ARC, with the others, some of the first nonprofit groups that engaged in social enterprise. The word social enterprise wasn't even conceived at the time.
Right.
ARC began doing for-profit initiatives under a not-for-profit banner. And of course, there's federal laws that regulate what you can and can't do, whether or not business income taxes are involved or not. But it's still one of the fastest, today it's one of the fastest growing trends in funding streams.
One of the things I'm not sure about, can you keep your 501c3?
Yes,
You're able to do that
yes,
and still make a profit?
yes.
Okay. You know
Yeah,
more.
there's rules and regulations
Right.
for it. You can, and you have to go to the IRS. You depend on your CPA. You depend on a tax attorney to steer you through whatever your endeavor is.
Mhm.
And if it is closely aligned with your nonprofit, you're not concerned, you don't have to pay business income taxes. But if For an example, if a church decided to sell basketballs, for instance, and that has nothing to do with the purpose and mission of a church, then on that particular business enterprise, you would file and pay for business income taxes. But if it's lucrative enough, that's not an issue. You just have to, just like when people look to buy businesses, I'm sure from you, look at the viability of the endeavor. Is this something that's going to be successful? What does it take to do it? What are the upfront costs going to be? What are the resources required? Do we have the manpower? Do we have the capital to sustain it?
But one of the things that we've seen is that that is growing, because we are getting some requests to do valuations on businesses for nonprofits. It hasn't happened just a couple of times. It hasn't happened that often. But we have seen that pick up a little bit, so probably see more of that. But I'm not as familiar with it yet.
Well, the only reason I know what I know is because we're heading down that road, and I just wondered if you had any information about that.
Haven't really, I guess I haven't seen anything out in the community of business articles that I see that have been published. Maybe there's some published information on that, but I haven't.
Actually, there's quite a few.
There is quite a bit? Okay. But maybe not from the valuation side, because typically the valuations that we would see, we'd have to look at it as if it's a regular company providing a regular service, and so we wouldn't treat it any differently, even though it's owned by a nonprofit. But we have been asked to determine whether it's a good value, or even to potentially negotiate between the buyer and seller to make sure that it's a fair deal. And we could be asked to provide financing, because that's another thing we would do, is help locate and prepare all the paperwork for the financing. So that could be another issue or something that we get involved with. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.